Welcome, everyone. I love hearing all of the chit chat. We have a really great group. We've got about 60 people total. We have about 30 that you can't see right now on our Zoom call, and we have about 35, 40 people here in the room. This is a great turnout. We're excited. Yes, yes. I want to see a show of hands here and on Zoom for people who this is your first meeting. Oh, that's great. Good. Welcome. Welcome. Thank you. We begin all of our meetings with a land acknowledgement that we drafted with consultation from Wabanaki leadership. The Lincoln County Democratic Committee acknowledges that we are meeting on unceded Wabanaki land. The Wabanaki Nations, the Penobscot Nation, Passamaquoddy Tribe, Holton Band of Maliseet Indians, and the Mi'kmaq Nation have stewarded the lands and waters of Lincoln County and all of Maine for more than 12,000 years. We acknowledge the cultural and physical genocide of the Wabanaki caused by colonialism and recognize that the impact of that history on tribal citizens persists today. We support ongoing decolonization efforts and affirm that Wabanaki nations are distinct, sovereign, legal, and political entities with their own powers of self-governance and self-determination. We have a great panel here with us tonight. I'm going to introduce them and then I'm handing the mic over and they're going to run the show from here on out, as it should be. We have here to my left, Audrey Hufnagel, who many of you may know. She lives here in Lincoln County. She is here representing Maine Youth for Climate Justice. We have joining us on Zoom, Phoebe Dolan, who is with Maine Youth Power. And we have Allison Gardner of Maine Students Vote. We're also joined tonight by Taylor Grant of the Maine Young Dems, and Audrey is going to kick us off.
Thank you. All right, I think this is working. So hello, my name is Audrey Hufnagel. I am a senior in high school at Lincoln Academy. I live in Damascus, Maine, and I just turned 18, so now I can vote, which is super exciting. Yeah, so I am a member of Maine Youth for Climate Justice, which is a statewide coalition of over 400 young people and about 25, 30 organizations from around the state who work to advance climate justice goals in Maine on the statewide level and to connect young people around the state. So MYCJ was founded in 2019, and one of the first big accomplishments of the organization was getting youth representation on the Maine Climate Council. So that was a pretty big win. And now there's actually young people in every single working group of the Maine Climate Council, and I'm on the energy working group, which is really exciting to have that. But yeah, so MYCJ does a lot of work on the statewide level, a lot of work around legislation, including in 2021, I think, passing a bill to divest the Maine public employee retirement system from fossil fuels, which is still being implemented. And currently MYCJ has been doing a lot of work on the tribal sovereignty efforts. And yeah, and also a ton of other efforts around clean energy and climate justice related goals on the statewide level. And MYCJ also works to connect young people around the state through calls and other activities, including recently the Youth Day of Action, which is an annual event where young people from around the state come to the State House and get a chance to talk to legislators and advocate for climate justice and policy. So yeah, anyway, I'm super excited to be here tonight to talk about youth voting and getting more youth participation in voting. I think it's a super important thing for young people to be engaged in our political system, especially with issues like climate change and so many other things that are happening right now in the world that are going to impact our futures as young people. And I think it's super important that young people have a voice in their futures. And one of the easiest ways in our current system that people can have a voice is to vote. So I think that it's super important that to get young voters out. So yeah, so thank you all for having me here tonight. I will pass it off to Phoebe.
Hey everyone, I'll take a second to introduce myself, and I'm Phoebe Dolan. I use she, her pronouns. I live in Searsport, beautiful Searsport, right by the ocean. I've lived in and around Waldo County now for the past 4-ish years. and I grew up in Southern Maine. So I'm from the southern part of Maine, but now I'm a proud Mid-Coast person, and really honored to be invited to come tonight. Maine Youth Power is the organization I work with. I'm one of the founding members. We've been around for 3.5 years, and we are a rural-focused youth movement, multi-issue, and we work in and around elections as one of our areas where we know we can get a lot of energy channeled into change making through the systems that we currently have. So we use elections as a tool. We also work in and around the legislative session, as well as running local campaigns with young people across the state to make change in their schools, and then also doing kind of broader political education, radical history work. Do a lot. Definitely check out our website if you want to learn more about any specifics, or hit me up later. But this year, which might be of interest to you, Maine Youth Power has set a goal of turning out 10,000 voters in rural and suburban Maine, which is a huge goal. We are feeling pretty confident we're going to do it. And we're excited to be working almost entirely in the 2nd Congressional District. So I know Lincoln County is not in the 2nd Congressional District. We'll still be organizing with folks out of it too, but our primary focus is to try to hit up as many folks as we can who are maybe less contacted and less often organized, which is sort of the mission of Maine Youth Power in general, is to be creating a movement that's for everyone, even when people live really far away. That's a little bit of our work. I'm excited to be here and in conversation with all these cool folks. I'll pass it to Allison.
Thanks. Hi, nice to see everybody. I'm Allison Gardner. I use she, her pronouns, and I live out in Freiburg, Maine. So all the way out in Oxford County, kind of both ends of the state here. I am the director of Maine Students Vote, and Maine Students Vote is a nonpartisan nonprofit. We are now part of the Democracy Maine collective, and Democracy Maine is the League of Women Voters of Maine, Maine Students Vote, and Maine Citizens for Clean Elections. All three organizations realized a couple of years ago that we had very similar boards and we're doing very similar work. So why not work together and share all those admin costs? Maine Students Vote was originally founded by college students in 2018. They were looking for more nonpartisan civic engagement and election resources on their campuses as ways for them to get involved in the work. And from there, we have snowballed. We have taken on all of the youth programs for the League of Women Voters as well. So we run their youth council. We do programming for middle school through college, through just graduated young professionals. And our goal is really to help people explore democracy and figure out what that means to them. So we offer paid internships and paid fellowships to really make sure that young people are gaining these opportunities no matter what their circumstances are. And we don't control what they work on, right? The League of Women Voters and Democracy Maine has given these young people complete autonomy from the missions of those two organizations. The only ask is that they stay nonpartisan. But so we are issue focused as well. And those issues are determined every year by the young people that we hire. This year we were very, very active in the gun safety work in the State House. We had lots of teams of young people who were writing testimony and showing up to testify and contacting their senators and legislative representatives. So we work to empower young people with the tools of how they can make an impact. And we work very closely with some other folks on this call, both Phoebe and Audrey and all the folks here. I think we're pretty interconnected in the sense that when young people are leading the work, they're talking to each other and they know who else is leading the work and making change. So I'm excited to chat with you all tonight, and was very impressed to see how many people were also logging on here. So very, very happy to be here tonight, and I'll pass it over to Taylor.
Hi, everyone. My name's Taylor Grant. I only recently took over as president of the Maine Young Dems, so this is a newer endeavor for me. But I mean, as the youth voice of the Maine Democratic Party, our goal is to make sure that young people are being heard within Maine politics, and that we are empowering the next generation of Democratic leaders and making sure that young people are able to have the resources that they need in order to run for office, to make a difference in the future. And with that, I'll pass it back.
I gave our panelists 2 prompts to get the conversation going. And the first prompt was, what have you found to be some of the most effective ways to turn out Gen Z and millennial voters? The second prompt is, what doesn't work? What do we need to avoid? So, well, we started last time with Audrey. Phoebe, I'm putting you on the spot, but would you like to go first and you can talk about effective first and then ineffective, or you 4 figure it out?
Sounds great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so Maine Youth Power has been around. We launched out of the 2020 election. So I did work in the 2020 election that sort of started Maine Youth Power. So we've kind of been around for 2 even year elections, and then obviously in 2022. And methods that have worked. So we have been running this like hypothesis that we are all in for relational organizing. Maine Youth Power spends most of our energy around elections in the past doing peer-to-peer or friend-to-friend texting or calling or hitting up in person to remind folks to vote. We've done this through using relational tools to track how many texts are being sent, and by hosting events we call vote parties. You may have seen them if I know Allison's heard a bunch about manufactured vote parties, but basically they're small events we invite one person to host where we're asking them to gather 10 friends. And in the more height of the pandemic, we had these as virtual events. And that host gives a 20-minute presentation about why they're voting. Could be like anything. Could be them just talking, could be a bunch of memes, whatever it is. And they present to their friends about why they're voting and like why they find that to be important. We give liberty to folks to share what they want in the past. And then those friends text at the party. Everyone like thinks of 20 people on their phone and texts 20 people each, asking them one question we've found really useful is like, what's your voting plan? Which leads to more of an opening of a conversation versus a push of like, don't forget to vote. But like, hey, what's your voting plan? And then some of the tools we use we can embed like a register to vote document, like how to register to vote, or embed like a tool to find your polling location, or rock the votes like, are you registered to vote yet? And we can like help folks auto add to the texting service that we like, the relational tool we use, auto add like different links of resources that could be useful for voters. And because these are people you can remember to go back and ask them. So if you did your party on October 28th, you could go back, the day before the election, retext everyone and go, hey, right, don't forget to vote, right? Like and this model has been pretty cool. We think we turned out about between like 3,500 and 4,000 people to vote in 2022 using this method, all who were young, because it's just young people and not necessarily people who have voted before. So this goes to what we think kind of doesn't work super well, which is this is not probably a surprise to you all, but you probably have done a lot of phone banking in the past for candidates, and young people don't often have landlines or live where they're registered to vote. These are the 2 like major things. Either they're in college, when they're 18, they registered at their parents' house and then like never looked back, or like they don't have a landline or any phone on any file for like, no one's looking at the America Votes does not have their phone number. So we saw that as like a big problem in how we're actually going to contact people in rural places who have never voted. And also knowing that if we're doing a broad rural strategy like we did in 2022, texting is a very great way to make up the distance between where people live. Like you can just text someone in Van Buren and they're going to be like, cool, I'll go vote. And it didn't take you like going there and tabling. It also is a method that we found to support folks who aren't on college campuses, because there's so much great campus work. But when folks aren't in college, but they're college aged, there's like a little gap. They're like really missing out on all the like incredible work campuses do to turn you out to vote, with folks like Allison and all those like amazing tabling events and parties and stuff like that. So this year we're expanding our program obviously significantly, and we're going to be doing some door knocking and in-person work, as well as doing relational. And one other quick method before I pass it on we've done is something called vote tripling. This is very nonpartisan, really fun day of like, we invite everyone who hosted vote parties to go to the polling location at their town, and have like fun stickers that like say silly things on them that we make that are nonpartisan. And then we have them stand outside the exit of the polls and just ask people as they leave the polls, like, can you text two of your friends and remind them to vote? This is basically they're tripling their effectiveness of their own vote because they're reminding two friends. This is like relational. We do like very loose data tracking, like a tally sheet. But in 2022, we were at 18 polling locations, and I think we got like maybe almost 3,000 vote triples. So it was like one day of like really like just contacting people. And if you stay long enough, you start meeting people who have been tripled. Like they come out of the polling location, they're like, oh my gosh, my friend texted me. That's been why. So it's a favored, like everyone loves it. It's a favored activity. So we'll do that again this year too. And those are some of the things we've found that are really effective for reaching out to folks who are like a little bit lost from the traditional methods. And I'll pass it to Taylor. I'll put you on the spot.
Thank you. Great insight from you, Phoebe. Thank you. So my own personal story a little bit is I did not used to be in politics. I only joined politics in 2022. That was my first campaign cycle. And before that, I worked in the mortgage industry. And then after the overturning of Roe v. Wade, I realized that, like that was the issue that kind of drew me in, and helped me realize that there are so many avenues in like state politics where you can make a difference and like have an impact that kind of fights back against some of the national trends, especially when you can't control the national trends. So for me, one thing that I found very effective is using specific issues, whether that be abortion, whether that be social justice, whether that be climate change, whatever it is that people care about, using those issues to kind of draw people in, because the thing that they care about is what's going to motivate them to be involved. And then kind of on the flip side of that is that sometimes, especially with young people who have so much going on in their lives, college, figuring out how to be an adult, all of those things, like burnout is very real and is very difficult. And so sometimes it can be difficult to ask people to be politically engaged when it's really difficult to hold so many issues at once, because there's so much going on and it's really heavy sometimes. And with the stresses of life, it's hard to, engage and turn into the news and be present and active for a sustained amount of time. So I think both of those sides of like allowing people the space to feel empowered and heard and like they can make a difference, especially on the local level. And at the same time, recognizing that people have a lot and their lives are very busy. And so like allowing them the space to disengage in issues that maybe aren't as important to them, or knowing that like it's important that they vote, but maybe they don't have to be they don't have to go to everything, they don't have to do everything, they don't have to give all of themselves to campaigns, and they can still make a difference. And with that, I will pass it to Allison.
Thanks. So I'm going to start with some of the things that we found that don't work, because otherwise I am going to forget to share them, because I always want to share the positives first. So I feel like one of the things that people say over and over again are young people don't vote, young people don't care. We hear these phrases all the time, and those are self-perpetuating myths, right? The more you tell a young person they're not going to do something, the more disengaged they become. So that's one of the main things that I tell teachers, I tell everybody that I'm working with, of like, don't tell a young person they're not going to do something. Like, you don't want to, that's not our goal here. And also when people say like, oh, this generation out of everyone who's voting right now votes at the lowest rate. That's not unique. Every single generation when they were 18 to 35 voted at the lowest rate of all of the generations, because we all know voting is a habit, right? Voting is something that you learn how to do with more and more efficiency and more regularity as you get older. And so the more that we talk about and isolate the fact that this generation isn't doing a thing, the more harm we're doing to our own work. So that's like the very first thing that I always tell people when they're like, oh, what should we do? I'm like, well, look, don't do this, right? Don't keep perpetuating these things. And every time I see a story or a headline that's like, young people are unlikely to vote because of this reason. So I'm like, well, thank you for furthering that negative story and that negative messaging. But I have had the complete opposite impression and experience working with students across Maine and young people across Maine. They really, really, and we really, really, really care about what's happening in the state house and what's happening nationally. I think Taylor was hitting right on it when there's so much happening. And of course, we all now, and this generation, this youngest generation included, are more exposed to news than we have ever been. So there is a lot of burnout, right? Like there isn't a lot of ways to get away from it and take time to protect your own mental health. And so the way we approach young people is we find out what they're interested in, right? We're like, what are you excited about? Like, what is making you want to be involved? Is that the like animal shelter regulations and the dog rules in your county or your town? Is that the gun safety and the drills that you have to go through at your school every month? Is that climate justice? Like what is the thing that makes you excited? And then we plug them in through those topics. And I think that a lot of students, especially who are 18 right now, aren't excited about this political election, right? These two candidates are candidates we've seen before. We've kind of been hearing the arguments between these two candidates for several years now. But the conversation, the way we turn that conversation is asking and engaging in topics around what can these people do, right? Like what can a president do once they're in office? And then you get the trickle down effects, like Roe v. Wade was overturned, right? Like we can talk through the trickle down effects of who presidents appoint and what those appointments then do. So those are some of the approaches that we take to start getting folks motivated and to get people past that initial, they've been told they don't vote, so they're not gonna vote, right? So that's how we like start to skirt around that kind of ingrained socialization. Like I hate to say it, but it is something that our society tells young people over and over again. So then when we are working with classrooms, and we do a lot of work on college campuses, right? We've been working with college campuses to, we say like institutionalize civic engagement on their campuses, to have them continue to pay young people to do this work, right? Because the best messenger for any topic is somebody your own age, somebody that has had similar experiences with you and that you can relate to. So this has been successful at a lot of our four-year universities, both Bates, Bowdoin, Colby, and UMaine Orono now have paid institutionalized into this college budgets votes teams. They're nonpartisan teams that they just work to get people to vote on their campuses. And we work with them to make sure they have election guides and voter guides and explaining quick one-pagers that are catchy that explain what are semi-open primaries, doing that election education piece. And then at our community college campuses right now, we run an election engagement fellowship program where these fellows are paid on their college campus by us, and they work with a cohort from across the state to do this work. And those young people are going to start onboarding in the next month. And so they host voter registration drives on campus. And we have a lot of conversations on all of our campuses that election day is the deadline that you need to turn something in by. It is not the only day that you can vote, right? And so we do a lot of early voting pushes and absentee voting pushes because life is busy and sometimes the day of the election comes and goes. I was talking to some college students last year and I asked one of them, or 2 years ago, and I asked one of them, I'm like, oh, hey, did you vote last year? And they said, no, I went and I got my ballot and I stood there and it felt like a test I had never studied for, right? They felt this kind of pressure. And so they left without filling out their ballot. And that is exactly what I want to avoid. I want to avoid somebody feeling so pressured by their decision that they get that kind of analysis paralysis and they don't do anything. So bringing polling booths into schools and working with county clerks and election officials to do those mock elections where a student can stand behind that curtain and feel what it physically is like to be in one of those spaces is work that we do with our high schools. And we run a few mentor to the polls program where you can sign up to walk with a group of students who live in a local college campus to the polls, or drive with a group of students to the polls and be that person who's there to be like, hey, do you have any problems? We've run into several students having problems with their voter registration and getting flustered and leaving and kind of needing our support to like come back in and be like, hey, you know, what's the problem? What can we figure out here? So that mentor to the polls program is our extension of what you've heard of like walks to the polls or marches to the polls, of including folks that are experienced and are going to stay there the whole time to be a trusted resource for other students. So that's where I'll leave it, and I will pass it back over to Audrey.
Awesome. Well, yeah, thank you all so much for that. I feel like I learned a lot from just hearing what you guys have had to say. And yeah, I think as a young person and talking to other young people in my school, I think a lot of people feel upset about like the current political system and feel like young people's voices aren't being heard and young people aren't being represented in our system, and that issues like climate change, for instance, aren't being taken seriously, especially at a national level, and there isn't this action that's being taken that's necessary. Like we see that there's this science that's telling us we need to take action, but we're not seeing this action from our leaders. So I think a lot of times that's caused young people to kind of lose faith in our political systems. And a lot of time I've been talking to, you know, like the election comes up sometimes like around the lunch table and stuff. And a lot of people are kind of feeling like, especially this presidential election is kind of like I guess like the lesser of two bad options, and not really feeling inspired or motivated. And, you know, when I talk to people like that, I have 2 points about that. One is that like as I think as someone mentioned earlier, the presidents they appoint a lot of people, and there's a lot of great work that's being done. I've had the opportunity to work a lot with NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, and there's some really amazing work that's being done at that level because of people who have been appointed. So there is like these like ripple effects of like, you're not just voting for president, you're voting for an administration. But I think that the other thing that's super important is that it's not just a presidential election. Like there are elections happening at all levels, like statewide, local, and there's so much change that can be made at the statewide and local level. So by showing up to vote and by voting for candidates at your statewide and local levels, like you can make a huge impact, especially on issues like abortion, when there's a lot of like statewide, local level work that's being done. And I also, another thing that as I kind of mentioned before, is that people often feel like their voice doesn't matter in the political system. And also a lot of times there's this feeling of kind of isolation, especially in Maine where it's very rural. There's not a ton of young people. So a lot of times young people feel isolated. They feel like they can't find other people with similar interests or similar values. And it's also just overwhelming. I think even for me, like I try to limit my news to like 10 minutes a day of reading through the New York Times, because otherwise it just feels so overwhelming and like hard to process. And I think a lot of times people just kind of shut that political news out because they feel like they can't handle that on top of everything else that's like in young people's lives. So I think there's a couple strategies that can be used to counter some of these feelings. I think a really important one is connection, and feeling like there are other young people who care about these issues, and there's other young people to hear that are supporting you. So I think that a lot of the strategies that the other panelists mentioned are super important, like having voting parties with your friends. Like that's a super important way to kind of make people feel like they're not alone and that they have other people who care about these issues. I also think like the point about issue-specific voting is super important, because I do think a lot of young people care about things, and I think a lot of times they just either don't know how to take action in the most effective way, or don't feel like their voice will be heard in our political systems. So, but I think that like they will come out and support certain issues. And I think that, yeah, like just meeting young people where they're at, like doing things like texting versus phone banking, or using social media as a platform, like going to the places where young people already are instead of trying to get them to come to you. I think that's super important. And I think just education in general, I think in our schools, there's a very severe lack of civic education. And I was lucky enough to grow up with my parents taking me to the polls every time they went to vote. But for a lot of young people, that's not the case. So they don't even really know how this process works. So I think that having civic education in schools, like starting from a young age, even before young people can vote, can help empower them and help them understand these political processes so they can better understand how they can make a difference. Because I think that that's really, if people feel like they can make a difference, feel like their voice and their vote can have an impact, that can really help people to motivate to actually go out and to vote. So yeah, so that's about all I have to say. And I will pass.
Oh yes, definitely. Let's throw it. Actually, there's one more person here that I wanted to introduce if I could. His name is Finn Kelly. He is the student representative on RSU School Board 40, which is my school board district. And I was so thrilled when I texted him and told him about this, and he came tonight, and I'm going to put him on the spot and just if you had anything you wanted to add. I know Audrey goes to Lincoln Academy and Finn goes to Madomic Valley High School, so it might be a different perspective. Can I put you on the spot, Finn? Right here. The camera pivots, so, and you can face this.
All right, so good evening, everyone. Really close? Okay. Kelly introduced me. My name is Finn Kelly. I'll have to be honest before I begin. I don't live in Lincoln County. I live in Union, and I'm an independent too. I'm not officially affiliated with the Democratic Party, but at the same time, I'm a firm believer that regardless of what walk of life you come from, everyone can come together to work on and to care about issues that affect all of us. And I can certainly speak to personally education and transportation too. As Kelly mentioned, I'm on the RSU 40 school board, and it was offered to me to do it. Nobody else wanted to. It's like, yeah, sure, whatever, I'll do that. But it's really gotten me involved with politics at a very local level, and sort of shown me why it's important to care about these things. At the last meeting, it was about what the budget will be for the next fiscal year for RSU 40. And what was very concerning was that in the last year or so, there's certainly been a sway of who's been on the board. And that was reflective of a lot of the conversation was at no point during the meeting was anything mentioned about education or students. It was all about taxes. And it sort of gave me pause and made me think, and that happened to coincide when I was asked to come here this evening. I thought it would be important to voice that and why these things matter about education. And we live in an area where there's a lot of poor communities, and I go to school with a lot of people I'm very good friends with. They're great kids, but they don't come from households who are perhaps as well off as mine, but doesn't mean they're anything else besides that. But it's important to give everybody opportunities, and unfortunately there are some people, and that's representative in the majority of who's on the school board, that don't care a whole lot about that, unfortunately. And it's why I'm involved with it and why I continue to be involved with it. And I'll touch briefly on transportation too. I'm a railroad conductor on the Belfast and Moosehead Lake, which is in Waldo County. It's in Unity, Maine. And I think that rail transportation is a key element in the state of Maine, and certainly in New England, for a green future in transportation and energy. Just recently, we moved several big transformers for a solar project in Albion and Unity. And we moved 5,000 people to the Common Ground Fair that otherwise would have been taking their cars. Unfortunately, our operation specifically is very much under threat because there are some people who don't value rail transportation just because we live in a state that doesn't have a whole lot of it. And certainly through working with you guys and continuing to be involved, want to be able to kind of push that forward and sort of advocate for it on the state and local level. I think that's all I have for being put on the spot. I'm very happy to be here, and thank you, Kelly, for inviting me.
One of our panelists has to leave for another meeting at in about 5 minutes or so. So I wanted Phoebe, before you do have to log off, is there anything that you wanted to be sure to add? And then we've got a couple questions in the chat, and I think we've got questions in the room.
I don't have much more to add. It's been really wonderful to hear from both Audrey and Finn and everyone else on the panel. I would say, yeah, I would echo what Allison says. Like I would, this election season, as you all are out working on turning folks out to vote and all sorts of ways that you work, there's a lot, there's every year there's a lot at stake for young people. This is a particularly unmotivating presidential election, as we've all mentioned. And Maine Youth Power's plan is to work very much on focusing in on, we're going to endorse a slate of candidates and then sort of focus in on like those candidates and getting people motivated by that. And I encourage you all to not fall into a narrative of like, you just sort of have to vote. Like I encourage you all to like find ways to get curious because no one wants to be told what to do. And young people, in my experience, have never responded well to being like, you just should go vote. Like, just do it. Like, it doesn't matter. Just do it. Or like, it doesn't matter. You have to do it, but it doesn't feel like it does. I don't know. It's a lot of doeses. But I feel like I want everyone here to leave with that thought of like, what's one way I can get curious, talk to a young person in my life, talk with folks that I'm running into, and think more about like, what are the solutions and really cool silver linings of this election that we can motivate younger folks to vote by, because we're not going to be it'll be a less successful election if we just go with a like just vote whatever attitude. So that's what I have to say, and I really appreciate you all having me, and I'm sorry I have to go early.
Phoebe, thank you. And you'll be hearing from me because I would really like to find out ways that the Lincoln County Dems can support the work that you and all of the groups that are represented here tonight are doing. We
Thanks
have
so
a
much.
couple questions. We have a question in the chat I wanted to toss out, and then we can do some in the room. If you were to pick one issue that would be the most motivating for young people to turn out in 2024, what would that issue be? Who would like to go first?
I can I can start. I think one of the most motivating issues for students that I'm working with, no matter where they are folks who have just graduated, I would say is gun safety and gun safety reform. I think our students and folks in our youngest generations of both Gen Z and Millennials grew up with active shooter drills in their high schools and are growing up with those. And if you have never experienced one of those in a high school, I would say you can count yourself as very lucky. So you don't always analyze where every exit is in every room and how you could find your egress. And I think a lot of students that are growing up right now, that is their reality. And they're very aware that this shouldn't be their reality. And working to change that is something that many students are incredibly passionate about.
I would say probably abortion access is a big one. I know a lot of people are upset about the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and just kind of everything that's happened since then. So I think that, yeah, protecting abortion rights is super important. And I think that's something a lot of young people care about.
Does anyone else any of the panelists want to offer something? An issue that could be particularly energizing? We have other questions, so we'll go on to another question real quick. Let's see. One of the you talked a lot about peer-to-peer, and Phoebe, this was you, especially with the organization you represent, Maine Youth Power. You talked a lot about peer-to-peer relational organizing. So Lincoln County is the oldest county in the state in terms of our population. And we want to be able to support younger groups, but how do people who are over the age of 50, what can we do to support you? And if we were to talk with voters, it's not obviously going to be the relational, the peer-to-peer. Is it more effective for us to get out of the way and instead to provide support to your groups to do that kind of peer-to-peer?
I'm happy to just quickly jump in before I have to leave, or someone else can too. That's such a good question. I think it's all about your, y'all are location specific. So if your group of people is mostly older folks, that's quite like a thing to own, the oldest average population in any county in Maine. That's pretty awesome. I didn't realize that about Lincoln County. I think the reason that we ended up with peer-to-peer as a model is because we just got really curious about like where our goal of outreach people, where do they spend all their time? It's like on their phones. Okay. So then like if you're on your phone all the time, like or hanging out with your friends, what's the best way that we could get people to vote in those spaces? So maybe the question for your organization is like, where are you all spending all your time? You're probably already organizing those spaces like farmers market, library, workplace, neighborhoods, whatnot. And then in terms of how to support young people, I think there's a few ways, like giving young people, anything that truly can be youth led, I feel like is the most motivating. And Allison's like a great example of that with the work at the league. And maybe I'd even like turn it over to Allison because I can't describe the league steering committee as well as you can. But there's a lot of like really great potential to have young people partner with folks over 50 to make change happen without having like it be like totally just led by you all making recommendations of what you think the best thing is. And I think that's like the danger.
Yeah, I would build on that to say that we if I put on my League of Women Voters hat, have come a very long way. We are also an organization of members that are mostly over 50. And when they decided they wanted to dive into some of this youth-led work and really put funding and staff time behind giving young people a space, they had a lot of changes they had to make as an organization of like giving up control, making sure these youth-led decisions were going to be respected and would be able to change their organization. And there have been changes and there have been growing pains along the way. But one of the biggest strengths is the fact that we have intergenerational organizing. We have organizers that have been working for 50 plus years on a topic that they're very passionate about and know the whole arc and know the system so well that when a young person comes in and is incredibly passionate and has the drive and has the motivation to restart some work, they have this mentor behind them that can say, oh, did that not work? How about you try here in this direction? And so making sure that those intergenerational connections are happening, that young people are learning from the folks in our organization and that our organization and our members are learning from the change and the impact that the young people who lead these projects are making is incredibly important. And I would also say that showing up to events that young people host and being there to support the work they're doing, like the Youth Day of Action that Audrey and Maine Youth for Climate Justice just hosted at the State House. There were plenty of adults around who were driving young people, helping with those transportation issues, making sure that students and in their schools and students that were in their family could get there. and being those resources to really help these youth events be successful. So showing up as a supporter and not having to be one of the planners is one of the things that some of our retired members are very excited about. They're like, oh, someone else is willing to plan our entire gun safety committee, and I just need to be there to lend my support and to write my testimony and to follow this leadership. And so I think giving space for ownership to be taken over pieces that you're working on, and that true sense of making a change to be something that's honestly supported by your whole organization is one of the things that I have found to be most impactful.
Thank you, Allison. Taylor, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, what I was gonna say follows really well off of what Allison just said. And I think what the older generation, one of the biggest things that they have to give is their resources. So their time, their money, their transportation, their knowledge, whatever that may look like in a given situation. Having like the capacity to handle things and support young people. I liked how you said giving young people the space to take ownership of things, but making sure that the older generation show their support and empower young people to feel heard and to feel validated. Because I think a lot of like young people are seeking like the validation of older people in like, I am supported, I'm acknowledged, like you're seeing what I'm saying and you're hearing what I'm saying, and you're supporting me in whatever issue it may be. And I think, so like for the Maine Young Dems is making sure that we're creating a network and a resource to build the next generation of Democratic leaders. So people who are going to run for school board, people who are going to run for city council, people who are going to run for the state house, finding ways to support them, because running campaigns is really, really hard for everybody. But making sure that young people feel that they are supported by their community, I think is super important. And you can do that by giving your resources in whatever way that may look like.
Thank you for that. Are there questions? I've got a couple more in the chat, but is there anyone here in the room who has a question? Just put up your hand. I can bring you the microphone. Hold on one sec.
A lot of our young people that will be able to vote for the first time this year were 14 and younger, right, in 2020. So that means they grew up not knowing a different reality and not knowing a point before those contentious choices were always in the media and were always ever present. And so you have this benefit of knowing a time before that and knowing a time when democracy meant something very secured. Like my first election, a millennial, and my first election was electing President Obama. And it was very, very exciting to me. The first time I ever got to vote was 2008, and it felt incredible, right? But that is not the same experience that a lot of the high school students I'm working with are having, right? They grew up with a very different narrative all the way around them. And so having that perspective of knowing what it was like to have a stable democracy is something that like I feel rather privileged to know, and rather privileged to know that like, oh, hey, this is what we could work towards. And this is what many people do want to work towards. And so I think it's just a matter of perspective and what we have all experienced. And so having two candidates that have been the only two candidates that you've really heard of for your whole growing up years is not as motivating as new candidates, and the idea of additional parties and the idea of a not two-party system, right? Like all of these things that folks float become exciting because there isn't that trusted foundation narrative of when the democracy that we live in was very, very stable with not a huge swing between both candidates. So that's my like initial instinctual response.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Allison said. I was in 5th grade when Trump was elected, so that was really when I was just starting to become aware of political issues. And, you know, I was, yeah, I guess 14 in 2020. And I very clearly remember like, yeah, like hearing about the insurrection on the radio and being really upset, but also like, you know, like this was, it's become now like, it's been 4 years since that. And now it's just become like part of politics. Like people talk about it. And that's kind of the political landscape that I've grown up in. And I think for a lot of people, like they feel like this political system, like the way it is right now just like isn't representing them. And really like it's very polarizing. And I think it can feel really hard for young people to be invested and to be involved when we've grown up in a system like this and having people like storm our Capitol and just kind of growing up with this as part of our lives. So I think, yeah, and I think a lot of, also in terms of this election, young people don't necessarily feel like they're being represented by either candidate, and that their interests and their goals and priorities aren't really being properly represented by either of the candidates. So I think that you know, there's just kind of a lack of feeling like we can make a difference, a lack of feeling inspired to vote, be part of our political system, and even a lack of faith in our political system, just given this environment that we've grown up in. So yeah.
I'll just hop in last and say yes to everything you two have already said, but like, so think of it in terms of like, I'm putting on my history major cap at the moment of think of all of the like unprecedented events that millennials have had to live through. And like, I feel very tired of having to live through unprecedented event after unprecedented event. Like I was 5 when Columbine happened. I was 7 when 9/11 happened. I can't do the math. I was 14 when the 2008 housing crisis happened and the recession. And like, I remember watching Obama being sworn in 2012 was my first year that I got to vote. And then Trump happened. So like, just think of all of the unprecedented major catastrophic events that have had to happen. And then the pandemic, and you know, you just keep adding to the list, and it can be really disheartening to feel like the system isn't working. And like what sometimes people that I talk to, we really, when we're in our darkest moments, it's like, what's next? You know, the insurrection happened, and then it's like, who knows what happens after the 2024 election? And that can be really hard to want to be engaged and like hopeful for the future when this has been your reality for your entire upbringing and your, you know, as you're entering young adulthood, what is that going to look like for the future?
I'm reminded of a meme that says, I'm ready for some precedented times. I know that we have a lot more questions, but what that tells me is we have so much we can learn from the people who've been here tonight and the organizations that they represent. I'm seeing lots of nodding heads in here. I suspect there's lots of nodding heads on the Zoom at home. There are almost 75 people at this meeting tonight. They came here tonight because of the people who were coming to speak. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all very, very much.